Hi everybody, Dave Blocks. I'm here at the workbench once again at Beyond Guitars, and I'm certainly glad to have you along with me on the journey through restoring Mike's dad's Gibson Mastertone from 1963. 60 years ago, this banjo was brand new. And here we are with it looking almost brand new once again. In the last video at the very end, I started to spray some lacquer on the neck. I had developed the color that I wanted in the last video, and I just showed you just beginning to spray it on, and I didn't say anything about it. But this video will go into depth on how I got the banjo neck looking like it does. I've got the color coats on, I've got the black and the transition from black to the body color. I've got about 8 coats of clear lacquer on top, and it's not shiny because I have sanded it just a little bit with superfine sandpaper. A little bug landed in it on the last shot I gave it, and while it was wet. So that gave me an opportunity to show you how to deal with those kinds of things, because if you spray finish, wet finish on anything, there are going to be times when things like that happen, and with lacquer it is just the easiest thing to fix. I'll show you. It took about 10 seconds to take care of that bug. But you have to know how to do it right or you mess up the whole thing. So I'll show you how I did that. And I did not sand the headstock. You can see that's still shiny, but it'll be shinier once I get the polishing done. And I can't do the polishing until I have the last coats on and I let it sit for 2 weeks at least, maybe even more. And then I'll do the polishing, and that's going to be great because hand-rubbed lacquer looks like nothing else. So join me for that, and if you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe, and you can catch all the other projects I have coming up. I want to give a quick shout out to Mike, the owner of the banjo. His dad was the player. Mike is not. He will sell this banjo. He wants to sell it, and he brought that up again with me on my last conversation with him. It's a little premature for me to mention because it's not finished yet, but just keep that in mind. He will sell this banjo. He's not a player, so it will be going at some point. I'll let you know how that's going to be arranged because I don't even know how that's arranged. The second person I want to give a shout out to is Josh. He's a viewer just like you, and he lives a little ways away, about 45 miles in the Sacramento area. And he had some questions about a Gold Star banjo he was looking at to purchase, and he sent me some photos, and he didn't buy that one, but he found an absolutely beautiful G12. It's an archtop maple Gold Star. It's an absolute pristine banjo. It looks fantastic. He brought it with him for his first lesson. He actually wanted banjo lessons too, so we got started, and he'll be back in another week or two, and hopefully I can get some photos of that banjo, and I'll show you what a really beautiful G12 Gold Star, an original Gold Star, looks like. So looking forward to that. Josh's enthusiasm is exciting for me because he likes the music so much. So that's all good stuff. I just really like it. So join me in this video. We've got a lot of work to do here, where I take you through all the work I did on this up to this point right after this. Okay, let's get right into this. This shot you saw at the end of the last video. If you hung around till the end, I didn't really talk about it. Just kind of giving you a glance at the gun that I'm going to use here. This is a DeVilbiss spray gun. That's the brand, and it came in a kit of 2 guns, a large and a small, and this is the smaller gun they call a detail gun. Designed for automotive finishing, it works perfectly well with really any thinner-based paint like lacquer. If you're considering latex paint for a house, it won't spray that. It's too thick. So this is good for fine finish work. Came in a kit with 2, as I say, the finish line and the starting line guns. It's kind of their budget kit, but DeVilbiss is a good brand, and I've been pleased with these guns. I'm using the detailed gun, they call the smaller gun, and it is a smaller project, so it seemed to me that would be the choice. And one thing I like about the smaller gun is the cup is smaller, so I need a little less solvent or less lacquer to put in it in order to keep it feeding correctly, and you don't want to skimp on that. You want to put plenty in there so you don't get any air sucking down into the nozzle, and you'll get skips. So don't want any skips. You need to keep the gun moving at all times when it is spraying on your piece. Never hold it in one place, never stop. Don't do circles, crisscrosses, patterns. You go straight across and you keep working that trigger on the gun. Don't be afraid to use the trigger a lot. If you have to kind of pull away from a spot, just close it off. Don't ever let it run when you're stopping. So here you can see I've got some short strokes, but I'm also working the trigger back and forth. So you get a feel for it where you're swiping, but you've only got the trigger pulled when you're moving. That's the key to preventing sags, runs, and heavy spots, pooling, and so forth. And you get better at that over time. I can put on actually pretty heavy coats without any runs or sags just by getting familiar with how the product dries. Now, speaking of dry, it's going on what I would call a little dry, in air quotes. Doesn't mean it's actually dry. It's going to adhere just fine, but it's not laying out flat. What you want is what's called a full wet coat, and the full wet coat will make the whole thing wet at one time, so you never see any overspray, because if it dries in a section and you're spraying somewhere else, the overspray will land on that, and you'll see a dusting and create a dull surface. So you want to be a little bit swift and aggressive with your spraying, that you get the whole thing with a nice wet coat. Now, you didn't see my edit, but I did let it dry for about 30 minutes here, and I'm feeling the texture. It looks a little rough. And so I made an adjustment here by, there's a couple of knobs on the gun, and I increased the fluid flow on the gun to help mitigate the kind of dry look that it's going on with. And the other thing, I want to get right on that too, because if you just didn't put enough on, maybe another pass will get it to lay out. But it's not working to the degree I want. There are several things you can do to increase the wetness of the work you're working on here and to get more coming out of the gun. That's one of them. Just give it another pass and see if you can get it to lay out flat. The second thing I'm going to try here is to add some thinner to the lacquer. So we need to let it dry now and then sand it smooth, not sand anything off, but just the little grainy look. And we'll be right back. Okay, so here's my neck. I've got a couple of flash coats on the neck, and the reason I put two on, basically two passes, was it wasn't going on as wet as I wanted. So I just wanted good coverage. So since it went on a little dry, and I need to thin the mix a little bit, but it's not bad. It does have a rough texture right now, but we're going to take our wet dry 400 and just freehand the sandpaper and smooth it out. So this is what hand rub lacquer is. We're doing it right now. It's been a couple of hours, and so we're just going to smooth it out. Well, there you have it in a nutshell. One cycle of many yet to come. As you can see, I've progressed along. I'll talk about that in a second. But, just sand enough to get the surface glass smooth, and the next layer will always have a good foundation and won't amplify any of the errors or mistakes or mishaps. Dust can land on, no matter what your booth is like, if you have a indoor or outdoor area to shoot finish, things will land on it. There's dust on the ceiling. It could be dandruff from your head. Could be hair. Hey, if a nuclear bomb went off nearby, some radioactive fallout could fall on it. And then what do? Well, you let it dry and then you sand it again. All of that will go away. So you're going to sand it anyway. What I'm looking at now, the next coat. We got a double coat on there, and that's what it looks like after a couple of hours of dry time. And then we will sand this one smooth and start over again. So here we go. Well, this is time consuming. There's no doubt about it. And you have to wait, a number of hours between stages. So it does take time, but it could be worse. It could be a lot worse. I could be working on a fiddle cut banjo head. Even the double cuts are a little bit, more work than this. This is a pretty simple shape to the peg head. But you do need to be sure you don't put pressure on the corners or you're going to take all the finish off. You could be working on a F-style mandolin in the scroll area, a D'Angelico guitar, electric guitar with that weird thing on top of the headstock. Could be working on a Burns Bison English electric guitar with those horns on it. I mean, there are all kinds of shapes that instruments are made in. This is one of the easier, but I do have some kind of tools that will conform and help me get the sandpaper in there. But in any case, this does have to be done when you want the best finish that you can do. Well, there we go. You know the routine. We're at it again. This is the third coat of color. It's a double coat. I like to do one side and flip it around, do the other side, and then just do that whole process again and then let it sit and dry. So after this, I'm thinking forward a little bit. Got to do the black fades on both ends. After that's done, I'm going to apply the amber finish. So I'll be taking off the binding tape so the binding can get some of that amber finish on it. And after that, we've got multiple clear coats to put on. So a little bit more spraying and sanding to do. Did you miss it? You blinked. I think you blinked. You missed it. I actually went through the next stage, not to bore you too much. It was exactly like what I've been doing. I sprayed it for the last color coat for the body color of this neck. And, as you notice, as you go along and build up color, it becomes more and more even and less streaky or any of those underlying problems that pre-existed. But so now I'm finalizing the last sanding before doing the black and the black fade at the headstock and the heel. So let's do that next. This may seem a little weird to you to see this. It is one of the ways that you can do a fade. In fact, this technique I got from actually learning how to do a sunburst on a guitar. And this is a very similar way to do it. You just create a shade from a barrier like that box, and then you spray at an angle and let the box kind of block the paint or lacquer in this case. So it does kind of drip down, or it creates a fade effect, and it actually works pretty well. Now there's another way that I do it, and I will do it the other way in the upcoming video. I want to refinish a neck a little faster than this, but I've got I want to try some different interesting things, like messing up the lacquer and showing you how easy it is to repair. But I think I will also do the fade effect on that and do it the other way, so you'll see both ways. So all I really need to do is finish up here and make sure I don't go too vertically so that it kind of removes the effect of the shadow. And I decided to just create a little area there where it extends down the neck a little bit. I was surprised, actually, originally the Gibson had quite a long kind of transition area, so I'm trying to duplicate that. And then I'll take it out and flip it around and do the other end of the neck. we got through that stage, and so that means that we're moving on to the next. We've got the color coats all done, and they have had time to dry. You know, this is a process that takes a number of days. It's not overnight, and you can see why they, the manufacturers don't like to use nitro. Gibson does. Maybe that's why Gibsons are so expensive, because it takes a lot of time and handwork to get the lacquer to look good. But the poly finishes, they go on and they just harden right up. A lot of them are UV cured, so they just shine a UV light on them and they cure up and they're good to go. So they're fast. That's a definite. But, we're doing it our way. So I've got really a lot of experience with the lacquer, but really no experience with poly. So that's my perspective. Anyway, the next step is to spray the amber lacquer, and I do want that on the binding. So that is going to be the next thing we do. Taking the tape off was a lot more difficult than I thought it would be, and that's because it was chemically attacked by the lacquer thinner, and it virtually glued itself on. The tape normally comes off quite easily, but the presence of the lacquer thinner really glued that stuff on. So it's kind of a laborious project, but I'll get through it. Okay, we're back at the spray bench, and we have the color on the neck. This is the look. This is what we've got. So aside from the binding being too white, it's the way it's going to look here. I'm very happy with it, but we've got to get some protection on it. If you were to play this banjo the way it is, the black in these areas where it fades is very, very thin and scarce. That's why it fades. There are just a few molecules of the black lacquer there, and they would rub off right away. So we need to get plenty of protection, and the only way to really protect colored lacquer is with clear lacquer. And I will group into that group of clear lacquers also our amber coats, which we're going to start with today. I wanted to mention that, the spray I was starting out with on this neck was going on a little dry, which means not quite enough or quite wet enough coats going out of the gun. So I was struggling a little bit. There are several ways you can increase the flow and increase the wetness on the product. And the first thing I tried was just adjusting the gun. The second thing was to thin the lacquer. You can only go about 10-15% thinner at the most. The other thing you can do is add a retarder, which will help in some cases because it slows the evaporation rate down and the lacquer will stay wet longer. But another way is to just check the gun itself and the nozzle on the gun. Those are available in different sizes. So, there's a big collar on the front of that gun, and it does come off, and you can change it. They're about $50 for each one. So I've got a 1.0 millimeter nozzle on the small gun and a 1.3 millimeter nozzle on the big gun. And of course, I can buy a bigger one for the small gun, which I may do, but for now, I'm going to use the bigger gun because it has a higher delivery rate with that larger orifice in the nozzle. So that's important for me on the final coats because I really want it to lay out wet and flat so that I don't have a lot of sanding to do. I just do a little light sanding between coats, and that takes care of it. So it's real important to me for the way I do it that I get full wet coats on, and we're going to be doing that with the Balin and now known as Mohawk stringed instrument lacquers. So now, time for heeding Toby Keith's words, a little less talk and a lot more action. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to shoot the amber on it. I consider this the first of the clear coats. It does have a little color, but it's not really my base colors or my main colors, so it's just kind of a tinted. It's all the same lacquer, though. I'm just putting these, the tint that I got all over my hands. That's the amber bottle mixed in with some of the lacquer. And just filtering it again. You can get those filters at the automotive paint store. And if you buy stuff, in my experience, the guys are great, and they'll usually give them to me if I'm buying some other products. But just be sure you ask for them, and they'll do whatever they want, I suppose. Can't predict what they're going to do. I'm putting the paper towel over it because no tape. Once I have lacquer on a neck, I can't put tape on it. because it'll peel that right off until it's fully cured. I'm balancing it on the can here to level the face of the headstock overlay so that there's less chance that the lacquer will run. Now, it doesn't take very long for it to harden enough that it won't run, but during that initial drying time, you want to make sure that things don't get out of hand. And I got no runs on this particular job anywhere. So let that flash off, and then we've got amber to put on the neck. And, you know, I tend to concentrate on the edges because that's really where I want the amber color. So especially on the headstock, it already had enough amber on the face. So concentrating around the edges and the back and the sides of the neck, where the binding is, of course. So we're still on the amber. It's the second coat. I can't remember now. I guess I'll see in the video if I put 2 or 3 coats of that on. I think it was 2, and then on with the clear, which is basically procedurally more of the same. And with every double coat I put on, I will sand in between. I wanted to give you a nice close-up look so you know what it should look like when it is sanded with fine sandpaper. And it needs a little dusting off, but pretty much ready for the last coat. And I wanted to show you the texture difference here as best I can. The satin finish and how nice that looks in its own way. But when you lay on that wet coat of lacquer, a dramatic change takes place. I'm going to do that right here. And so keep your eye on that neck. And what it does, it just kind of comes to life when you shoot on a new coat. And it really, really looks great. So I'll flip it over and do the other side. Something happened, though, and I mentioned earlier in the video that I had a little visitor. Now, it looks like an imperfection over kind of toward the right a little bit. It's not. It's a reflection. It's very shiny. But being at night and using a light, of course, it attracts insects. And I don't have a huge problem with that usually, but it does happen once in a while. And one did land on there. So I'm going to finish giving it the second coat. You know, even if the insect landed there, I would continue. What do you do when a bug lands in your work? You do nothing, actually. You don't do a thing. If you were to touch it while it was wet, you would not only really damage the surface that you just applied, but, you know, it softens those underneath too because it's solvent-based, and you could mess it up all the way down to the wood. So do not touch it when it's wet, no matter what has happened. And once it dries, you can mitigate the situation. Well, I've made some really nice progress with this banjo neck, and as you can see, it's got a natural gloss to it already. It has not been hand polished. I've just been sanding with fine sandpaper between coats to keep it level. It's just a battle to keep the lacquer level. But this is the way you want it. Even before hand polishing, you get a much better result if you start out with a natural, wet coat that has laid out nicely and does not have wrinkles in it and all that sort of thing that you might need to sand out. So I'm happy with it, but I do want to show you something. That last segment that I videoed, I was spraying the lacquer on it. That last segment I was doing at night, if you recall, and that all worked out well. Night isn't always the best time to do it, but it was a warm fall evening and the humidity was low. But the one thing that did occur, an insect landed on it right there, and while it was wet, so he's now part of the banjo. Rest his little soul, but you can see it there, and I could feel it. It protrudes, and I put this yellow microfiber down so I could create a kind of a shadow or profile. So you can see right there is cast a shadow because it is protruding above the surface. And I want to tell you what you can do when that kind of thing happens. Just let it dry. Let the lacquer dry with the bug in there and everything, and you can deal with it later. And that's what I'm going to do right now. I've got my wet dry sandpaper, and I'm all ready to give it a little bit of sanding. And that's what you do. You let it harden up, and then you can just sand the imperfections out with every layer. So here it is right there. And so I'm just going to start sanding. I feel the rough spot. And no damage to the lacquer. And the next coat will just fill in, and when the bug is gone, it is just gone. Well, I'm going to take you on a short little sentimental journey, the good old days when this thing first arrived and what it looked like. I'd pulled the tuners out, but that was about it. Boy, that's fresh in your mind with the new finish on there. It's quite a contrast, isn't it? Well, that's about it for me today. This needs a little bit more. We need to assemble it and do the setup, but first, of course, the polishing. But I can't polish it until that finish has cured for a number of weeks, so it's really going to be put on hold for a little while. But I have some other projects in mind. I'm going to keep making videos, so come along with me, like and subscribe. I really like your comments, so please comment if you would, even if you're just telling me where you're coming from. Whatever it is, I always like hearing from my viewers, and I like to get in touch, and that's happening more and more, so it's pretty exciting. Be sure to join me next time. More exciting stuff coming up from Beyond Guitars.